Witam Państwa w to ciepłe
Good
jesienne.
afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is a sunny afternoon, a warm afternoon, and yet the subject of our panel sounds winter is coming, energy security in times of war. I'm very glad to be joined by two excellent experts, Oksana Aliieva, climate change and energy policy coordinator, Heinrich Böll Foundation, Kiev, and Joanna Maćkowiak-Pandera, president of the Energy Forum in Poland. We are also joined by Anton Antonenko, vice president of Dixie Group, a think tank, which, among other things, analyzes energy management in Ukraine. Unfortunately, he can only speak to us online because he hasn't been able to cross the border. So we are going to watch a video, actually, he recorded. As I said, in Poland, it is quite nice and warm this afternoon. Unfortunately, the atmosphere in Ukraine is not as nice as that because shelling and bombing has continued since this morning. Their energy system is based on coal and nuclear power, but also renewable energy sources. This system right now is being quite challenged, unlike any other energy system in Europe. Well, obviously, it's hard to imagine that any energy system would be prepared to face such a challenge because since World War II, we've never had a chance, or our energy systems have never had a chance to test themselves, to see how energy systems, energy supply systems would operate in war conditions. Ukraine is, on the one hand, an extremely interesting state, a state that has undergone significant reforms, including of the energy market in recent years. They have invested quite a lot in energy transition, renewable energy, and climate protection. Let me just say that in an international index called Climate Change Performance Index, it is an annual, a yearly test of climate policy. It turns out that Ukraine is on the 20th position in this index, in this ranking, and Poland ranks 52 out of 57 states that take part in this system, which I think best reflects the effort that Ukraine has made in order to undergo energy transition and modernize its energy system. My first question goes to Oksana Aliieva. I will ask in English because I think that Oksana would like to answer in English.
The biggest difficulties in Ukrainian climate policy before the war, which you ranked the highest and what was still to work on.
Thank you very much for this question. Well, I would like to thank the organizers of this event. And it is really the right moment to speak about such matters now. And I would like to thank all the Polish people for the support we have received from you. Everyone from Ukraine who's in Poland can see how you have supported us. So I wanted to thank you.
Climate policy was quite high at the political agenda in Ukraine before war. And you mentioned climate change performance index. This is quite interesting, especially from the perspective of methodology that is applied to calculate it. And the biggest portion of performance is from actual decrease of greenhouse gas emissions. And Ukraine was ranked top high there. But the reason was not because of some climate action that was applied, but because we actually simply stopped many productions since 1990, and 1990 was a baseline year for this index to be calculated. And you know what? If this index is counted now, Ukraine will be ranked top 1. Because what we have now, we do not have any production anymore, mostly. That was the most emitting greenhouse gases. like no metallurgy, no many chemical enterprises. So it would be quite complicated to rely on any indexes because the comparison base would be simply different from what it was before. And even with that climate change performance index, we had a lot of troubles after 2014 because after occupation that has happened already then, of Donbass, we lost part of our production and we couldn't count anymore on gases that were there. So this point of our domestic policy towards climate would be definitely needed to be revised after war, because it is very complicated to even collect any data that are related towards planning, because we do need to know which is the background, like to collect evidence base. And in these circumstances, it is quite complicated, especially because we know that many greenhouse gas emissions are associated with war. We do see simply burning of oil products at their capacities. We know about war-associated emissions because of military vehicles driving all over the Ukraine. We know about emissions that accompany missile explosions and so on. So how to count on these and how to report on these under UNFCCC? Sorry, no one knows. So this would be another challenge to reformulate climate targets, to know what they should be, because currently those climate targets are still up to date. Ukraine has committed to become climate neutral by 2060, and this is still on the agenda, but definitely during recovery that hopefully will be framed in a green manner, and we and partners among NGOs, different stakeholders, those at local and regional level for sure advocate that recovery happening in green and sustainable manner. And then at this stage, we will be definitely revising our climate policies and targets as well.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to give a voice to Mr. Anton Antonenko, and if I can, if I can please ask you for a video.
Today, I unfortunately could not make it to participate in person, but I'm very much thankful for this great opportunity to address you with some thoughts of mine about war and energy in Ukraine, but also across the region. So if we look at the implications of war that it had on the energy sector of Ukraine, I think we need to take a larger period than just after the February 24th. If we will look at the wider time frame, we will see that Russia already tried to stop, for example, gas supplies, as it happened back in 2006 and 2009, and sometimes after that as well. If we look at coal supply, for example, we would see the occupation of some coal mines back in 2014. If we think about nuclear supply or nuclear war, we would probably recall a lot of Russian activities in Ukraine linked to disinformation, propaganda, and so on that were going on for a long time, promoting Russian fuel, propaganding against any other fuel or any other technology that can be used. We unfortunately see a lot of damage that was caused to the renewables in this time frame of war. So in 2022, we also witnessed the occupation of hydropower plant, that is Kakhovska power plant, in 2022 as well. So along with that, we also saw the oil products supply cut that happened due to Russian-sponsored or Russian-led attacks shellings and bombings on Ukraine in 2022. So one can say that almost all generation, all types of fuels were affected by the war, by the Russian intentional damage. And practically no generation or no fuel source can be relied on as a single and resilient and sustainable. As we now talk to local communities doing the research on energy resilience, we hear a lot of thoughts from them. But the main thought is diversity and flexibility alongside with use of local fuels is actually something people are looking at. Sometimes communities use the photovoltaic stations to charge their cell phones and have a stable mobile connection. Sometimes, when it was possible and the gas supply was not damaged, people used it as the main energy source while electricity supply was completely off due to shelling and bombing. And of course, a lot of people, a lot of communities look at wood now as a potential diversification source and hope for this winter. I would also add the good coverage of grid, electricity grid, that avails changing connection schemes and being flexible and rapid in putting back the electricity supply to Ukrainians. And of course, last but surely not the least, are heroic repair teams that sometimes do miracles in terms of bringing electricity, bringing gas back, returning water supply, and also making sure Ukrainians are less hurt in this regard. My thought here and the argument I'd like to make is potentially we are looking at a new era that concerns energy. As we already heard from the EU leadership, energy war alongside informational war are wars that are fought together with the war in Ukraine. They are Russian wars that Russia wages upon us and wages upon the all civilized people. So my thinking is whether we can get energy system diversified enough, flexible enough, where every energy source plays its role and is duly substituted or has the capacity to be duly substituted with a backup source or plays a role of potential backup source, so that in these times of struggle, in these times of fight, we are well off with the energy supply. We have some kind of energy security and we are resilient enough to win the battle and to win the war. With that, let me please thank you again and wish you a great discussion.
Anton w swoim speechu mówił
In
między innymi
his
o tym,
speech,
jaka
Anton
przyszłość
talked
może
about
czekać ukraińską
the
energetykę,
possible
ale zanim
future
pójdziemy trochę
before
dalej, chciałam
Ukrainian energy systems. But before we talk about the future, the far future, I would like to ask Joanna about the near future and the upcoming winter. The Energy Forum published a report which said that the upcoming winter is not looking so bad due to the fact that the industry is not working. Many factories are shut down. And it does seem that the majority of the heating plants are working. But this report was published several weeks ago. Is this information still true, or has the situation changed in this few weeks? And what is the situation in Ukraine? Thank you. Can you hear me? I would like to thank you for inviting me. And recently, the Energy Forum introduced a program for Ukraine. It started in August, and we were joined by Maciej Zaniewicz, who was supposed to be here, but he couldn't come, unfortunately, because he's in charge of this program. And as this program is concerned, we are only at the beginning of this path. We are only now gathering information and learning how we can best support Ukraine to ensure better energy security and climate protection. Indeed, we published two studies. The first one was the one you referred to, and I have to admit that before we started working on it, I didn't know much about the energy system in Ukraine. But the reason why we have introduced this program is not to take this really paternalistic stance and say that we have something to teach Ukrainians, because this is not true. And personally, knowing what I know, I'm convinced that the Ukrainian system is much more diverse than Poland. They have nuclear power plants. They rely on renewable energy to a much higher extent than we do. And in fact, after 2014, in a very short period of time, Ukraine was able to become independent of Russian gas supplies, which gives us hope that it can be done. And I do hope that Europe will be able to cut itself off from fossil fuels. This is something we have been working on as an Energy Forum, trying to answer the question how we can effectively cut ourselves off from Russian fuel. In terms of preparing for the winter, I think I'm not the right person to talk about the level of preparedness of Ukraine for the winter as a representative of Poland, a country who's now trying to find coal all over the globe, because for many years we believed that we are so strong in hard coal, and in the meantime, we became dependent on Russian supplies. So this is a really peculiar situation we have found ourselves in. But if we were to look at the data on the macro level, it is my impression that Ukraine is quite well prepared in terms of the winter, because maybe then you can tell me if I'm right in my beliefs, because my image may be my vision may be distorted. But you said that the industry, a large part of the industry is no longer operating, and that demand dropped from 55 to 30, I think, so 30 gigawatts. So this is actually the total amount of installed capacity in Poland. The demand was 55 gigawatts in Poland. Right now it is 27 gigawatts in the winter. So just to show you where we are. But renewable energy, it was disconnected from the grid, because they would lead to an even bigger oversupply and problem in the conventional power generation. And I understood that it happened in Ukraine. And then it is true that Russia started attacking critical infrastructure, including power plants. The Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant is still under attack. The situation is dynamic there, and the Russians are trying to take it over, it seems. In the past, there was the impression that they were trying to take over. Now they started targeting the infrastructure. And I understood that there were 28 drone attacks on energy infrastructure, including by drones. So this energy war, which has been going on since August last year, I'd say, because back then gas was being used as an instrument to put Europe under pressure, and it has only escalated in recent months. So in terms of preparation for the winter, so most certainly there is a challenge with providing heating to citizens, because in some locations it is difficult, especially that some power plants that should provide heating are not operational, and also cogeneration plants were targeted. In terms of electricity, we can imagine living without power, but as for heat, if we look at a block of flats where many families live, it is a challenge if they don't have heating. On the other hand, the amount of hard coal available and is quite impressive compared to what we have in Poland, and we have heard declarations from Ukraine that they are prepared to support us with 100,000 tons. But I don't have to explain, ladies and gentlemen, what it means for climate and in terms of clean air. But one area of cooperation which is very important, I think, it's the connection between our power grids. Actually, there are two ways of connection. Why one was not being used and the other one every now and then. The situation of the energy grid in Poland is difficult. We have problems balancing the system, and we have to have interventions and buy some power from Ukraine. And then the exports were interrupted and after the first attacks, and because it was told that Ukraine has to focus on stabilizing their energy supply in the country. And of course, the situation was difficult, but in the long term, of course, it will take a long process. But I assume that Ukraine will join the European Union. And of course, a lot of work remains also with regard to the power supply and also the ETS system, the CO2 emissions and all that, because it is important that power generation, if we also increase the exchange, the national exchange, export, the market rules have to apply. So the directives on the ETS system has to be implemented.
So that's definitely a part of it, but I can see that there is room for cooperation in order to support the transformation process. For Poland, it is a significant problem to strike a balance during a peak time. Our market is just too big for us to keep exporting electricity to Germany, to Sweden or to Ukraine. That's not going to happen, and most countries are not going to have a surplus. They used to have it, but now it's no longer the case, so a lot needs to be done when it comes to developing that connection on the Polish-Ukrainian border. So that would be room for cooperation that I would like, well, I wanted to describe it so that you understand what we can do together, and I think it can be a great platform for further discussions in the months and years to come, and to our mutual benefit.
Yeah, I would like to in fact, reply to your question about the upcoming winter, and it will continue. You described a bit kind of future cooperation, and if to come back to this winter and to what Ukraine needs now. So the situation with current generation is quite dramatic in both power sector and the heat sector. Like Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant was producing 25% of Ukrainian electricity, and it is not operational at moment, 25%. Due to a lot of refugees who fled Ukraine, yes, we have decreased our consumption, and there is no that big demand as it was before war. And this is also reasoned by closure of some enterprises, but at the same time, it reasoned disproportion in demand, like many people fled to the west of the country, and many enterprises left to the west of the country, so demand there, in fact, increased. And in these circumstances, to balance Ukrainian system is even more complicated. And when many CHP plants were also damaged in last 10 days, because Russia selected new instrument in their energy war, because this war that is happening now, this is absolutely energy war. We see that this is fossil fuel war, and those fossil fuel supplies were used for blackmailing like since you mentioned previous year, but it was much earlier, those discussions around Nord Stream 2, and much earlier. So that dependence of Europe on Russian fossil supplies is not coincidence. It was very step-by-step, very dedicated work that was very widespread, and it interfered every sphere of political life in Europe. 100, if to believe beyond coal coalition, 104 billion euro were paid by European Union countries since February this year for Russian fossil fuel imports to European Union. So this is something that can't be just ignored. We can't make an image that this does not exist. This is conditions that influence everything else. Support that Ukraine can receive from European countries as well, and domestic policies within the European Union as well. So the current capacities in Ukraine would be enough to cover existing demand in electricity, for example, if no more objects will be hit. But you can make an assessment how dedicated are Russian troops to damage civilian infrastructure and critical infrastructure. One of the drones that was intended to hit, not like this is central heating plant just in the middle of the Kyiv, and it was attacked many times to be destroyed, and few residential buildings were destroyed just because this is the strategy, this is strategic instrument, and a couple was killed, couple of men and woman was 6 months pregnant. It happened today. So energy infrastructure is one of the most important targets for Russian troops at the moment. So I can't promise that in 2 days, in 1 day, in 2 hours, we would still have enough capacity to cover this winter demand. And also, this is true for distribution network, because not only generation objects are being hit, as well distribution networks are being hit. And this means that ordinary consumers can't receive necessary heat and necessary electricity to survive this winter. And this will have a lot of consequences, not only like this moment one, but this will influence health of many people who will be necessary, for example, to stay in cold conditions. This is very complicated for public buildings, how to survive in such circumstances. For example, this influences gender situation, because schools, if they will not be heated, they will be closed, and then everything in regards of education and childcare will be remote. Those of you who have children, do you see how this could be done in remote mode? No, simply this will influence every sector of life of Ukrainians. Thus, I would say that there are few additional points of current cooperation that could be implemented right now. One, and first of all, this is ban and embargo of all Russian fossil fuels. Thank you. This is not true only for oil that's supplied by tankers, like that oil that's supplied by pipe is not that much different from that one supplied by tankers. Okay, this is not true only for gas or for coal. Ukraine was quite effective in eliminating Russian gas supplies, but still it received Russian gas by reverse export. So it was still Russian gas in our Ukrainian mix, unfortunately. So all of us, we need to do much more to ban, and this will help us on our energy transition way as well. The second point is technical support. Ukraine will need a lot of equipment, those in energy sector. We need to repair our infrastructure, and it should not last like for months. it should be done in hours. This is how our energy engineers work now. When heating, when shelling is just stopped, not finished, they are on the place to restore that infrastructure. Many of them were killed in these months because it is unsafe, but they do it. And this is something that also requires further support from Europe. There is an urgent support fund established by the Secretariat of European Energy Community, and it supplies a lot of equipment to Ukraine, but we actually need more. We need more infrastructural and equipmental support. The third point would be about financial support. Financial side of electricity market is very unstable at the moment, and curtailment of renewables was reasoned as part of the reason, as well by financial insecurity of the market. But now, in worse circumstances, we do not have enough payments from population because people spend this money for something else. Either they left their jobs and they do not have any more income. So this level of payment has decreased, and the market, financial side of the market is very unstable. So financial support is required. And the first thing is what is actually the simplest way to do and the simplest way how to support Ukraine. We need much more discourse within the European Union on that. This is not Ukrainian crisis, and this is not Ukrainian war that recent increase in the prices for energy in the European Union, that this is Russia and Russia attack of Ukraine that recent increase at the increase of the prices at energy markets in European Union, and that people do have this kind of reason-consequence linkage, and then we would not see so many protests in European Union against of raising prices, because this fuels those radical and conservative waves that we were talking in the previous panel that we discussed earlier today. Everything is connected. So these 4 points of support that Ukraine requires actually right now.
Thank you for clarifying this. And now I would like to open our debate so the public can start asking questions now. We've raised a number of topics. We've been talking about what Europe can do. We've been talking about what's happening in Ukraine right now. We've been talking about whose war this actually is and what the state of the infrastructure is. I can see one question over there and then another one over there. So let's start with you. We cannot hear the speaker. I'm sorry. We cannot hear the speaker. I have two questions. Question number one to Ms. Aliieva. You said in the beginning that the renewable infrastructure suffered. Is it so because the conventional power plants need to be secured more extensively than the renewable energy infrastructure, or is that due to another reason? Why did the renewable energy infrastructure suffer so much? This is my first question to Ms. Aliieva. And now my second question goes to Ms. Pandera. What is the consequence of the damage caused to the infrastructure in Ukraine when it comes to the energy supply in Poland? We know what the situation is like in Russia and that we need to bypass that. But how is the Polish energy market affected by the damage caused by the Russian troops in Ukraine? And has the demand for electricity increased because of the influx of the refugees to Poland? And there's one more question over there. Hello everyone, Dariusz Szwed. I had this great pleasure of leading the Green Party in Poland. Now I represent the Green Institute in Poland, and together with Heinrich Böll Foundation we've been implementing a project called Energy Democracy. So I would like to say thank you to Ms. Aliieva and to the Ukrainian society, because you are fighting for us. You are fighting for our future. Thank you for this. Your people are dying so that we can wait in our fuel-consuming cars in traffic jams here, and we are wasting our energy. We've been wasting energy here in Poland for years, and we've done little to stop Putin from making so much money on gas and oil and coal imports to Europe, but also on uranium, because uranium is also a weapon in the hands of Russia, Rosatom. 25% of the processed uranium market belongs to Rosatom. So they are playing the cards in Hungary and in the European Union. So thank you for mentioning the democracy in this context. The technocratic protection of the climate, so just limiting, reducing our emissions, that's one thing. But if we wake up in an authoritarian regime, even if the emissions are low, like in the green Russia or in the green Emirates, well, I wouldn't like it. So even though the emissions are low, I do not want to live in a country run by an authoritarian regime. I'm sorry that this is not really a question, more a comment, but we need to remember that sufficiency goes first and efficiency goes first. Can we really afford continuing our lifestyle we've had so far in the European Union and at the same time claim that we are showing solidarity with Ukraine? And can we increase the efficiency of what we have so that it's not 2050, but I don't know, 2030 or maybe 2025, we can cut off all imports from Putin, but not just Putin, because Putin and Russia, they're just one of the sources of evil in the world, but there are more. There are more sources of evil in the world, like Putin. And Ms. Pandera mentioned this. Our climate minister has been dealing with fossil fuels, and is hardly interested in democracy or human rights. He just wants to buy these fossil fuels as cheap as possible. So once again, let me express my respect for what the Ukrainian society are doing now. I'm not just being polite here. I really admire you for doing all you can to stop that Russian terrorist that Putin is in this war of terror. And the Second World War was also an energy war, because it would not have been possible to murder people on such a scale during the Second World War II if there had not been oil, because the tanks would not have worked and the aircrafts would not have worked. So every war is about energy. And our minister is looking for fossil fuels, and he wants to buy fossil fuels as cheap as possible, and he doesn't care about human rights. Thank you for taking so much time. I'm sorry, I took so much time. So, voice over to our speakers.
So what's behind that?
If to speak about which sources of energy were available before war and now, we still have a lot of renewables. But for example, with the wind capacities, around 90% are at occupied territories, so they are simply not available. This is not true that they are destroyed, but they are there. With the nuclear, as the Zaporizhzhia power plant was occupied, so we actually lost 25% of our nuclear. Then a lot of gas and coal CHPs were damaged. With solar, around 8% of solar installed capacity were destroyed, and around 17% as of end of September are on occupied territories. So this is not something that somehow selected by, for example, Russian troops to destroy, but there are some capacities, for example, solar ones that were destroyed, especially in Mykolaiv region, where the most active hostilities are happening. And just to reflect on what you said on democracy side of energy, for sure, definitely, and this is what we stay for as well, that it is not only about energy transition, but this is about just energy transition and civil community-based energy transition. And this is what we would like to see in green recovery, because otherwise those autocracies rise. But you know what? And please forgive me if this is something that you would not like to hear. But for example, when the European Union is now agreeing with Qatar or with Egypt or with Azerbaijan about supplies and is being criticized by human defenders group, but we as Ukrainians who are dying now, like, we are fine with that, like, speaking frankly. At this moment, we are fine with this because our goal is to fight Russia and Putin regime. But long-term consequences and life of those people in those countries whose rights are day-to-day violated. And today's this year, climate negotiations will happen in Egypt. So what should Ukrainians say there? This is ethical and moral dilemma. And this is the world which was created by fossil fuels, and we are thus in such a position of moral dilemma. Thus, yes, absolutely, fossil fuels should be weighed out of our everyday life, and this definitely should not happen in 2032. And the decision-making towards this should be much faster in European Union, and meetings on this question should not be scheduled once per half of a year, because this is much more crucial aspect to discuss now.
I know that you asked two questions, so I will respond to the other one about the influence of the Ukrainian situation on the Polish energy system. It is not overly big. Our systems are connected, but only for reasons of intervention, so when an intervention is needed. So there is no continuous interaction between the two systems. But of course, it is important to us which capacities are available if we need to do intervention and purchase something, because the situation in Poland is serious and we don't have enough coal, not only for private households, but also for the industry, for the entire energy systems. The demand for power is slightly lower, only slightly lower than last year. So to respond to your second question, in how far has the influx of migrants affected the demand for power, it's very hard to answer because nobody has has measured it systematically. There must be some influence, but we haven't seen any drastic increase in demand for power. If we look at gas, the demand has decreased significantly. From the industry side, it was decreased to 60%. The Energy Forum tried to answer the question what the reason between this decrease is. Was it because of shutdown of certain facilities, or we don't know, nobody has researched it yet. So in general, we've seen an increased demand for electricity. On the other hand, high energy prices will probably lead to a decrease in consumption. So we'll see. To respond to your question, Darek, I believe that in the past we lived with cheap energy. So even if for some people the energy bills were high, in general we can say that the energy was maybe not cheap, but the prices were stable. And some people have forgotten that it is not a given, it may be different. As for the ETS system and the rights to emissions, it is an instrument that is introduced in order to increase certain types of energy. Of course, not energy in general, because some people claim the system has been introduced in order to increase energy prices throughout. This is not true, of course. This is just an instrument that allows us to reflect in the price some other factors to make it more objective. And now we see that energy efficiency has gained a new dimension. Only last week I talked to a company which operates in the field of making buildings more energy efficient, and it seems that there are instruments, for example, on software level, that allow us to save up to 30% of energy consumption. And in one example, this is true especially for large buildings, for, I don't know, government buildings, not for private households. But when we speak about buildings or public utility buildings used by schools or swimming pools, thanks to such measures and instruments, it is possible to improve energy efficiency by 80% and save 80%. And the instruments were in place, but nobody was interested because the cost of energy was acceptable. Now this is no longer the case. The energy market in Poland seems to no longer exist. Or when we talk to politicians, we sometimes feel that there is great support on their sides to destroy the energy market because they believe that it will curtail the power of large corporations. They are wrong in this belief. We will just lose stability. We will not have access to reliable data. And if we have no data, we have less instruments to control the situation, and it will actually and give those who want to actually abuse the situation even more chance to operate. So the prices, the energy prices, the heating prices are still stable, frozen from last year. Some companies are talking about increasing the rates, but the people haven't gotten their bills yet. They only receive some forecasts. And now in this situation, we are supposed to talk about freezing energy prices. It is a very difficult discussion. On the one hand, we have a problem with supply because suddenly we have less resources, we have less energy, less fuels, because we no longer use gas from Russia and we no longer use coal from Russia. And this happened. This change happened over a very short period of time. Unfortunately, we still use oil from Russia. I hope and that it will end soon. But the situation is difficult. The government is saying that they will try to throw some money to the support to support the people. But is it going to be successful? We don't know. Maybe market participants will say at some point that in this situation we no longer want to be on this market, and it may lead to even more severe deficiencies. And now, as for efficiency first, well, right now we see no other alternative, but for some reason the government doesn't want to talk about it because people in Poland don't want to hear about some austerity measures, about saving, spending less. Maybe it is connected to some historical trauma. When we start to talk about austerity, people in big cities react in an enthusiastic way in what they say, but is it really possible? Many families, many households don't spend excessive amounts of money, and if they are told they should spend even less, The question is, can they really do it? They don't spend much. So I don't know what the response will be. Probably they will ask for suggestions what they can save money on. As for energy and climate, we are spending amounts that we haven't spent in the past. At least in declarations, because this money probably hasn't been spent yet, but they declare that 70 billion will be spent on climate measures for air-related measures. Some 5.5 billion have been declared. And of course, in terms of government support, maybe it will help us to survive the winter. And the question is whether or not it will change our behaviors in terms of consuming too much energy, because maybe with government support we will survive this winter without changing anything in our behaviors. But how about next winter? And then if we look at the market and different market players responsible for trade and distribution, well, my fear is that the system will not take it, and that it will not work. We focus our efforts on importing fossil fuels from other countries now, and I have to admit that overnight it would be difficult to stop using fossil fuels completely and leave people with no help. We have been taking steps to change the situation for 5 years now, and we are very happy to see that now the government has declared to become neutral by 2030. But of course we don't expect the change to happen overnight, and we don't want to leave those people who use coal to heat their houses behind. But we need a change, and we need to learn and change our behaviors. And I think the situation of private households which use coal is most difficult right now, especially that the market is really intransparent now. We don't know where the coal is coming from, and our organization had to dig a lot in the data to be able to identify where it comes from. And only recently where we managed to identify the routes where the coal comes from. Initially it was impossible because it was very intransparent, and then it turned out that still Russia is in the game. So the fact that we have become so dependent on, as a European Union, on Russian gas and coal, it actually stemmed from the strong belief in uranium. Well, possibly we don't analyze uranium, so I can't say, but maybe you're right. But uranium is not only imported from Russia, also from Nigeria, Canada, and a few other countries. But this dependency stems from the belief that there is a red line that no country will be prepared to cross, and yet Russia did. So what can we expect now? Are we still prepared to say that Putin will never press this red button? We don't know. The problems, Europe's problems with oil are less severe than the problems with gas. And for gas, for Russia, it is more painful if we cease buying oil than gas, because they make less money on gas than on oil. And now that OPEC is coming in, and they are actually reducing the supply of oil, so it's a clear exchange, oil for gas, and it spreads on other countries, and they use these fuels as an instrument of pressure. And we really have to consider what should we do. So do we want to subsidize fossil fuels so that in the end it is not private households that benefit, but it is the producers, it is those countries that either supply the fuels or those who trade, the companies who trade? Are we going to do that, or invest in our renewable energy sources? So And of course, while realizing that it is not possible to ensure continuous supplies from renewables because these sources work in a different way than nuclear or fossil fuel does, but it is still possible to develop and build a reliable energy sources that includes renewables to a much larger extent than what we have now. Thank you very much. I would like to move forward a little bit because I have a very important question to ask you. Green recovery in Ukraine, is it too soon to ask about it considering what the situation is, or should we start thinking about the future now and ask the question how the energy system, the energy sector in Ukraine should be rebuilt, which regulations should be introduced, which professions, which jobs, which technologies will be best to use in this process. The EU has declared already that the EU is prepared to invest in this recovery process in terms of funds, but also technology, etc. The Polish government has also declared that they would like to be involved to the rebuilding of Ukraine. I don't know if the Polish government used the word green as such, but some declarations have been made. So the question is now, is it too soon, or is it already the right moment to talk about rebuilding? And if so, which solutions would you recommend? Which traps should maybe Ukraine avoid?
Very acute question, I would say, because sometimes during discussions we try to pose ourselves in comfortable occupation of speaking about the future, green recovery, those money, like we love to split money that we do not have yet, like as everyone does. But the issue is that answer to your question is yes and no, kind of both. What Ukraine needs is to be everywhere at once, like in the current time and in future time, because we do not have this time to start speaking about recovery just after the war, because no one knows when the war ends, first of all, and the second, because many areas have been deoccupied already, and they need that recovery plan at this moment, like Kyiv region, Chernigiv region, Kharkiv region, all of those regions need recovery concept right now, and they need finances and technologies for recovery right now, because people who used to live there, they would not wait for much longer time. So it makes things complicated because we need to fight. Organizing any advocacy visit of Ukrainian stakeholders somewhere, they would be speaking like about weapons and about recovery, because that recovery happens, we need weapons. But if we will speak only about like weapons, then why we do need weapons if we do not speak about our future and recovery? So like there is no something we can select between these two alternatives. But the point is that war has created such circumstances that could be as well used as an entry point, or could be ignored, and then no leapfrogging happens. And for example, right now with this winter, if to come back to the topic of the panel, we could be in the situation that when some efforts are done just to survive this winter, but they are not in line with decarbonization goals. They're just in line with people's survival goals. And this makes things more complicated later on during recovery, and makes recovery not that green as we would like to see. Because if, for example, if a household or municipality will do some investments now, will make some efforts right now to survive this winter, this is unlikely that next year they will revise this technology, for example, if it was introduced. And if to speak about heat supply, some of multi-apartment buildings, they just need heat supply. And it depends on which type of heat supply they will receive. Will it be heat pump? Maybe, but the cost is the first issue, and availability on the market is the second issue. it could be that coal stoves are installed there, and people will be happy because they will survive this winter now. But this really does not mean that next year they will refuse of this source of energy then, or some kind of oil products like mazout, how to say it in English. Yeah, but I guess that mostly people understood what I mean. So this is solutions that are on the table now, and we can be either in chaos when all of communities will just try to select which is the most cheap and easy solution for them right now, or we are in more complicated process with assistance done, but when each solution is weighed and we compare it with some kind of a green alternative, maybe more costly or maybe not financial but time costly, but then it will use this opportunity of energy transition. Otherwise, we will stuck in chaos for upcoming years in the energy sector.
Thank you. So, oddam głos pani Annie Banderz.
Well, it is very difficult for me to say what the recovery should be like in Ukraine. I think it's up to Ukraine to make a decision on what directions it wants to take and what priorities it wants to have. The situation is not even the best one in Poland. People have started talking about using more coal in Poland, but you know, the problem is where that coal could come from, because we've been digging out coal for 150 years and it's becoming less and less. And we are not the best masters of renewables in the world. You know, we are more like hipsters because we have the heating pumps and we have photovoltaics, and it is the richest that have the best situation right now because they don't need to pay any bills. They are able to produce energy themselves because they invested in it, but they were hipsters investing in Poland, you know. So I do not have any ready solutions I could offer, and I think that our approach has changed as well. We want to come up with an answer to the problems we have right now. Our goal is to make sure that the war is over as fast as possible, and people need to stop suffering, and that's our #1 priority. And I think it's the same for Ukraine and for all the other countries in the European Union. The main narrative should be about becoming independent from fossil fuels. So if there is a pipeline going to a specific country, or if there is a train with coal going to a particular country, we need to remember that this might be stopped just like that if a country providing these resources wants to weaponize its resources. So we just need to face that challenge, and we need to come up with new solutions to the problems we have, and we need to decrease our dependence. And I must say that some time ago I thought that the local energy potential, so the potential of energy produced locally, was limited. That's what I thought some time ago, because, you know, you have this problem that the rich will be fine with that and the poor will be left with that big inefficient system. But right now there is no alternative. You need to use all the resources you can, and the energy costs are so high that we need to make it possible for the people to cope with the situation the best they can. And we are talking about reducing the footprint, but on the other hand we have the energy costs, and they need to be considered as well. And there is a huge demand in the industry as well, so maybe that local production of energy might be a solution as well. But first of all, we need to stop Russia so that we don't need to be afraid of the next step that Moscow is going to take, so that we don't need to live in fear. And once this has been achieved, we can start planning for the sustainable future we want to have. So the priority number one we have now is stopping Putin. Thank you for these statements. Thank you for your attention and for your active participation in our debate. So let's applaud our speakers. Thank you. Thank you so much.